I would like to turn to your being briefed in 1975 to appear for the Department of Corrective Services. You were to be junior to Chester Porter, who I've also interviewed, in the Nagle Royal Commission. And I would like to talk about both the commission itself, but also you were put in a rather unfortunate situation where you ended up having to do most of the work because Chester had to withdraw.
Yes. Well, Chester's brief was taken away when the government changed. No criticism of Chester whatsoever. Chester, and I tried to continue the tactics that Chester and I had worked out, but in an attempt to get the result they wanted, and in an attempt to save money, the new government decided that there was not to be a silk appearing for the Department of Corrective Services.
So that left you with a considerable burden.
Yes, very much so. I was bombarded by requests for documents from our files. I had to try and read them all first and see whether they were justified in being withheld, which none of them were, but to see what I would need to do to deal with anything that came out of those documents. I then had to cross-examine various witnesses and so forth, and my most important thing, try and keep the Royal Commission as far as possible away from the things that the department was worried about.
Namely the systemic abuse and mistreatment of prisoners.
Yes. Mm.
Things got complicated though for you, didn't they?
They did, because I suppose about 3 or 4 months into the commission, the prison. I'm sorry, I have to start early in that. I was appearing for the Department of Corrective Services. This was accepted at the beginning to be the commissioner, the deputy commissioners, the head office people, and the superintendents of the various jails. They were regarded as the department. About 3 or 4 months into the commission, the superintendents, seeing what was happening, I've got to start again. And Chester and I had interviewed all the superintendents, and they all just agreed with the head office that none of this was going. There was no, what was your phrase? No systemic belting up of prisoners. Those were our instructions from everybody. Then 3 or 4 months into the commission, after Chester had to go, one morning, without any warning to me or to anybody else, the superintendents' union and all the superintendents admitted that they knew what was going on. Nagle called me into his chambers and said that I had a conflict, and pointed out to me that I had a conflict of interest. Well, from that point on, when I realised that, and I said, well, Your Honour, I will elect to continue to appear for the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioners. These ones can go off on their own. And Nagle, or his assistant, David Hunt, who later became a Supreme Court judge, said, oh no, it's not as easy as that, because you will have obtained information from the outgoing superintendents, and you'll have difficulty in you'll have a conflict of interest with them.
And mainly that information being that it was inconsistent with the
What they were
current
now saying.
that they were now saying.
Yes,
That's right.
yeah. And I gave a bit of a thought to it, and it was obviously correct what was being said. What was not ever mentioned was that when, on the very first day of the commission, when appearances were being given, there were a whole host of about 5 or 6 counsel who wanted to appear for various do-gooding bodies, like the Prisoners' Action Group and I think possibly whatever the Greens, or if the Greens didn't exist in those days, the then equivalent of the Greens, and so forth. And they all wanted to have separate representation. And Mr Justice Nagel said, "Oh, we can't have as many as you and all that." And they said, "But there'll be a conflict of interest between us." And he said, "Oh, well, if conflicts of interest develop, we will have to deal with it." That never appeared in the transcript. And when I developed a conflict of interest, it was not dealt with. Now, I must say that I was so thrilled to be out of it. I was exhausted. It had been the most enormous task. It would have been... there was plenty of work there for a silk and a junior, but it was much too much for one individual to be running, and I was so thrilled to be out of it that I didn't really complain.
Yes, I think it's interesting. I understand, say in your looking back memoir that the Commissioner had no knowledge of any systemic mistreatment of prisoners, but you say with hindsight, you were not so sure of those lower down the chain of command. And you now, I think you have a different view now that after any assault on a prison officer or escaped attempt, the offender would be charged before the visiting justice and given a rap over the knuckles and then moved off to one of several prisons. Yes. Yes. So with that in mind, what were your thoughts, even after you'd withdrawn, about the findings of the Royal Commission? Were you uncomfortable knowing what you knew by then, and in terms of the conflicts of information, let alone the conflicts of interest?
Yes. Chester and I had appeared before Deputy Chief Stipendiary Magistrate Lua in a Public Service Board inquiry. I was Chester's junior into the alleged bashing of a couple of prisoners outside the observation wing at Long Bay. That case, Lua made a finding that in favour of the department. There was an appeal to the Supreme Court and thence to the High Court on a question of jurisdiction. I wasn't briefed there. I can't remember why. And there had been a finding there that no one above the particular chief prison officer who was on duty at the time knew anything about what was going on. As a result of what I learned in the Royal Commission, I think I would have to say that Mr. Lewis, that finding was wrong, and that there was a systemic knowledge. In relation to the Bathurst riot, one of the Assistant Commissioners, looking back on it with further knowledge, I think one of the Assistant Commissioners who happened to be at Bathurst at the time must have known what was going on.
You were saying too, I believe, that there was a bit of a Sergeant Schultz attitude among the lower superintendents. I hear nothing, I see nothing.
Yes. Oh, I'm sure that was so.
So, yes, perhaps not one of your more, well, not so much happy memories, but a sense of where justice had been done.
I think for some reason, and I think Chester covers this in his book, for some reason, Nagel disliked the Commissioner for Corrective Services very much. I know McGeechan was very verbose, didn't like answering questions directly, but Chester and I were both of the view that, ignoring what happened at Bathurst, that McGeechan had done a lot to pull our Department of Corrective Services out of its 19th century attitude, and that he was fairly unfairly treated by the Royal Commission.